Good afternoon. The May 4th, 2020 virtual meeting of the Anne Arundel County Council is now in session. This afternoon, we will hear from the Board of Education regarding their proposed FY21 budget. But first, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Volkey.
Present.
Mr. Pruski.
Here.
Ms. Fiedler.
Here.
Ms. Rodvian.
Present.
Ms. Hare.
Present.
Ms. Lacey.
Present.
Ms. Pickard.
Present.
Madam Auditor.
Present.
Thank you. All are present.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please pause for the invocation led by Ms. Hare from District 7.
We are thankful for this day that you have given us, for its blessings, its opportunities, and its challenges. May we appreciate and use each day that comes to us. We pray for strength and guidance for each day as it comes, for each day's duties, for each day's problems. May we be challenged to give our best always, and may we be assured of your presence with us.
Thank you, and we'll pause for the Pledge of Allegiance led by Ms. Fiedler.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, please read the Open Meetings Act statement.
The county attorney has asked that I read the following statement. The Maryland Opens Meeting Act, a state law, requires public meetings to be open to the public and to be held in places reasonably accessible to individuals who would like to attend these meetings. General Provisions, Article Section 3-102C. The virtual format of this meeting of the County Council is due to the COVID-19 emergency and is necessary in light of the serious health risks associated with public gatherings, as well as the governor's various executive orders limiting public gatherings. While a virtual meeting of this type was not envisioned by the Open Meetings Act, steps have been taken to ensure that this virtual meeting includes alternate accessibility features that the Open Meetings Act Compliance Board and the courts have reviewed and approved, such as having a call-in phone number that allows anyone with a telephone to call and listen to the meeting, broadcasting the meeting with video and audio on cable TV and on the web, and allowing written public comments to the legislation to be filed with the clerk and considered by the council. The County Office of Law has opined that the public access provided by this technology makes this virtual meeting reasonably accessible to the public and therefore complies with the Open Meetings Act.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Is there any item any council member would like to place on the agenda at this time? Seeing none. Because this is a virtual meeting, we cannot provide reasonable seating facilities for the public or the news media, and we cannot physically be located in Annapolis, the county seat. May I have a motion to suspend rules 3-103 relating to the location of meetings, 3-105 relating to the reasonable seating facilities for the public, and 3-106 relating to the reasonable seating facilities for the news media?
So moved. Lacey.
May I have a second?
Second, Hare.
And second.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Volkey.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Ms. Fiedler.
Aye.
Ms. Rodvian.
Aye.
Ms. Hare.
Aye.
Ms. Lacey.
Aye.
Ms. Pickard.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. The motion to suspend rules 3-103, 3-105, and 3-106 is passed.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce Dr. George Arlotto, President of the Board of Education, Michelle Corkadell, Matt Stansky, and Alex Sheknovic, who will review with us the proposed operating and capital budgets for fiscal year 2001. At this time, they're being brought into this meeting, and we'll wait for that to happen. I see everyone. Dr. Arlotto, I believe you'll be beginning this presentation. You have the floor.
Thank you. I'm going to ask our board president, Mrs. Adele, to begin.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Pickard, Vice Chairwoman Lacey, and members of the council. I'm Michelle Corkadell, President of the Board of Education, and I'm pleased to offer a few brief remarks on behalf of my fellow board members. First and foremost, I want to thank every one of you for the time you've invested on behalf of our school system, and most importantly, our children. We are in a much better place because of that investment and that continued partnership. This is a difficult year. None of us could have expected what the last several months have brought. As the budget season kicks off, one could easily feel like we are playing blackjack with a deck that has no aces. We may not have all the cards we want, but that does not prevent us from building a winning hand together. That's our charge for our children, our county, and our future. In his budget address Friday, County Executive Pittman used a three-word phrase to sum up this effort: build back better. Our school system uses a four-word phrase that you may have seen or heard a few times: we are better together. And truly that statement rings. I want you and everyone watching and listening to know that we intend to walk this walk with you, working collaboratively to make the best of a situation none of us wanted or asked for. Where we start doesn't matter though. It's where we finish that is what counts. We will build back better because we are better together. Thank all of you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Arlotto. Dr. Arlotto?
Thank you, Mrs. Corkadell. And thanks to each of you on the council for taking the time today to discuss our budget. And for the record, I'm George Arlotto, the Superintendent of Schools for Anne Arundel County. I'd also like to thank the county executive and his team for their hard work on this budget. If I know one thing about budget folks, it's that they love predictability. And so this was, as you can imagine, a tough road to hoe, but they've done a great job. I want to take a minute to address the erroneous newspaper headline I saw yesterday claiming that our school system viewed this budget with, and I quote, less than enthusiasm. You will not find that sentiment anywhere in anything that I or President Corkadell have said thus far. We are deeply appreciative about where we are right now, given where, given where we all find ourselves during these unprecedented times. Without the dedication and partnership of the county executive and his team, we could be in a far worse place. The inclusion of a step increase for our teachers and other employees is critical, and so are the 84 new general education teachers and 76 additional special education teachers to address enrollment increases across our system. We gained more than 1,500 students this year, and these positions will help keep class sizes from rising. Also critical are the 12 new behavioral health positions, including 9 additional school counselors. As we have all talked about many times, the social emotional needs of our students continue to increase, maybe now more than ever, and this budget addresses some of those needs. I also want to express my appreciation for the 16 pre-kindergarten positions the county executive funded. Those are essential to our efforts to support our youngest learners and build strong foundations for future success. I can't conclude without mentioning the inclusion of the 57 positions for Crofton High School. These positions mean the school will become a reality and open this fall, fulfilling a 3-decade-long quest for residents in this part of the county. Between now and June, you will put in countless hours trying to do one thing: make Anne Arundel County better. As Mrs. Corkadell said, we are here to help you do that in any way we can. With that, that concludes my formal remarks, and I'm going to turn it over to Alex Saknovich, our COO, to walk you through some of the numbers.
Good afternoon. For the record, I'm Alex Saknovich, Chief Operating Officer for Anne Arundel County Schools. Today, we're going to be working off of a exhibit that was furnished to Ms. Gray and hopefully passed along to you just moments ago. As in prior years, our intention is first to go through the operating budget. We'll walk through that budget in some detail, then we'll entertain any questions with respect to the operating budget. Once, Madam President, you believe that we've satisfied the operating budget portion, then we'll transition to the capital budget element, where once again we'll do a brief presentation to orient the council to the exhibit that's been shared, and then we can go through any questions. So we're going to begin with this 2-page document. It's a spreadsheet that is essentially a consolidation of the budget requests. And what this exhibit does is it juxtaposes the budget that was approved and requested by the Board of Education of Anne Arundel County in February of 2020 to that presented by the county executive on May the 1st, 2020. As is our tradition, we will begin on the revenue side of the ledger, the where the money comes from piece, and then we'll transition down to the expense side. So working on the exhibit that you have before you on the revenue side, from unrestricted federal government sources, the Board of Education had requested appropriation authority for an additional $600,000. And that is in fact what is funded within the county executive's proposal, so no difference there. From the state of Maryland, in terms of unrestricted funding, the Board of Education had asked for just under $15.6 million of appropriation authority of unrestricted state funding, and the county executive's budget acknowledges that just under $15.6 million. You'll see there's some rounding, and that's because the county's budget system is formulated to acknowledge rounding. So don't let that throw you off very much. As Mr. Pittman said in his speech and budget delivery, as well as in his comments in the press, we find ourselves in very unique and uncharted times. And in line with that, as the county executive foreshadowed early on, the county was in a position to fund maintenance of effort level. So there is a state law that computes in an exacting fashion what the legally permissible minimum funding level is year over year from a local county government unit to a Board of Education. And that is calibrated both based on the prior funding year as well as the enrollment increase year over year. We did that computation and agree with the same set of computations done by the county budget office, and have shared that information with Madam Auditor as well. So the maintenance of effort provisions for FY21 over FY20 would require that at a minimum $14,750,000 and approximately $400 be provided by the local unit of county government to the Anne Arundel County Board of Education. The Board of Education, when they adopted their budget, albeit back at a time when things were much different globally, we all acknowledge that, had submitted a budget.
Unfortunately, Mr. Shaknovich has frozen. If we can give it a moment and see if he can adjust this on his end.
It appears they are all frozen in the school system building.
Madam Chairman, I will check in with tech on this if everybody can just hold for a moment. Thank you. Madam Chair, we're still trying to figure out what's going on. A reminder for Board of Ed personnel, if they can still hear, is that they can use the call-in number to call in and speak. So again, we ask for your forbearance. We will be back with you momentarily.
I think they're making some progress at ACPS, so looking for maybe 1 minute more wait.
Mr. Shaknovich, you appear to be back with us. We can see you and we can hear you. Mr. Shaknovich, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you appear to be in with video and audio.
So again, Alex Chacneau, Chief Operating Officer for Anne Arundel County Public Schools. Apologize for the technical glitch. Let's hope that's the last time we experience that today. So where we left was taking a look at the revenue structure with the county executive's proposal funding the board at the maintenance of effort level of $14.75 million. We'd asked for a $4.6 million local fund balance, or a local appropriation authority, and a continuation or a carryover of $13 million of fund balance, both of which the county executive's proposal aligned with that presented by the Board of Education. So in total, year over year, the Board of Education had requested $89.5 million in total unrestricted general operating fund revenue, and the budget put forward by the county executive has the budget slated at $35.5 million year over year on the unrestricted side. On the restricted side of the revenue picture, the county executive's budget does in fact comport with that requested from the Board of Education without any differences other than minor rounding issues, which again are inconsequential. So in sum total, the request that was put forward by the Board of Education in February, requested $96.597 million from all sources. The budget put forward by the county executive on May the 1st, 2020, provides new revenues combined both restricted and unrestricted from all sources, amounting to $42,593,000. So that's the revenue picture. I will say that the last comment is we have not heard. There has been discussion bantered about regarding the sureties of funding from either the state government, et cetera. So we've not heard anything to the contrary from the state. So at this point in time, we fully do anticipate realizing or actualizing the amount of monies that were provided by the state of Maryland, or at least signaled by the state of Maryland. So going down to the expense side, what you'll see is the color coding is anything that's highlighted in yellow on the exhibit that you have before you is a line item that has been included in the county executive's budget. And we'll go through it in exacting detail, but you'll notice in some cases there is essentially an exact match, both in terms of the full-time equivalent and the dollar amounts for each of those line items, and in some cases there's a difference, and we'll differential, and we will speak to each of those in turn. So dealing with the first line item collectively, we'll just call it compensation. For FY 2021, the Board of Education had requested approximately $42 million in compensation increases, which would be for all eligible bargaining units with negotiated agreements and unrepresented units here within the Board of Education. The budget that was put forward by the county executive fully funds a step or a step equivalent for all four of our bargaining units that are have negotiated agreements with the Board of Education, as well as the two non-represented groups. So the almost $15 million worth of compensation increases, again, would provide that step increase for those eligible within the bargaining units to receive one according to their bargaining scales and their pre-negotiated agreements. Going down to the next area, here in Anne Arundel County, we've got 2 charter schools and 2 contract schools. We've got one of those contract schools, and that being the Monarch Annapolis School, that under contract still has some enrollment growth potential left in it. So they are allowed to enroll and subscribe more students in the year ahead than the year currently. Under state law, charter and contract operators essentially receive a pro rata share of what we use to fund our Anne Arundel County students in the 125 some odd school buildings we have under our own roofs. So the Board of Education had asked for $1.18 million to provide to the Monarch Annapolis Contract School to help support the additional enrollment growth that they are allowed to actualize under their contract, and the county executive's budget fully funds that. So the Monarch Annapolis School will be able to continue with their enrollment increase. The other two charter and contract schools run by Monarch, as well as the Chesapeake Science Point School, high school, have already reached their enrollment capacity, so there's no enrollment increase there. The line item under that, the PPE increase, so it's a rising tide lifts all boat phenomenon. When the Board of Education's budget goes up for things like training, salaries, materials of instructions, et cetera, the charter and contract schools under state law get a commensurate amount of monies. You'll see that there is a difference between what was requested from the Board of Education and what is contained in the county executive's proposed budget. And that difference essentially recognizes the fact that the entire Board of Education's budget is not being recommended for approval. And as there is a reduction in the Board of Education's budget approval, there's a commensurate decrease on the charter and contract per pupil or per pupil amount of funding that they receive. So they would have approximately $880,000 that would be split on an enrollment basis, per rata enrollment basis amongst the charter and contract schools. The remaining portion of that page and the next page that follows is an itemization of the various requests that the Board of Education had requested. And you'll see that there is a mix of line items that do not have the yellow shading next to them, and therefore those are line items that have not been included within the proposed budget that was put forth by County Executive Pittman on the 1st of May. So by way of example, the first 2 or 3 line items having to deal with alternative education, or the 18 additional assistant principal positions, you'll notice in the far right-hand column do not have an FTE associated with them and do not have a dollar amount associated with them. So those amounts or those line item requests were not contained within the county executive's budget. So in the interest of time, I will not go through everything that was not included. I'll focus on the things that were included. Again, those with the yellow highlighted shading. So the Board of Education, when they adopted their budget in February, had requested 4 bilingual facilitators with a cost of $277,000. The county executive's recommended budget would fund 2 of those 4 bilingual facilitators and appropriate $138,600 towards that. The Board of Education had requested 2 additional FTEs, one being a pre-kindergarten early educator and one being a teaching assistant, for us to complete the expansion of the Carrie Whedon Early Education Center. That school is built to support 80 students. We opened that this year and are supporting 60 students, sort of in a soft rollout fashion. And these 2 positions will allow us to get that building up to its state rated capacity of 80. So they will be fully outfitted in terms of personnel for the year ahead, and there will not be an additional personnel related increase for Carrie Whedon in the years beyond. The superintendent made mention of Crofton High School. We here, just like you and the county executive, are all very excited that after 3+ decades of talking about a high school in the Crofton area, that school is nearing completion. In fact, we already received most of our use and occupancy permits, and we're continuing on the final inspections on that. So we're well on our way of having the school open, and that will allow the school to open this September. And the school is designed to open for 9th and 10th graders. The board undertook redistricting activities in the prior year to identify exactly what students would attend. So the plan is that the school would open up with 9th and 10th grade only. The year after, it would expand to 9th, 10th, 11th, and then one more year after that, it would fully open up as a 9th through 12th grade fully functioning high school. So the Board of Education had requested the initial 57.2 positions affiliated with the opening of Crofton High School on the operating side of the budget at a cost of $5.6 million, and the county executive's budget fully funds the request for Crofton. So Crofton, not just from a capital construction side, as I indicated, is well on track and sees no obstacles to it opening, and this will complete the staffing.
Madam Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, my apologies for interrupting. I wanted to let Dr. Arlotto and the rest of the people there with Board of Ed and schools that we can actually hear them talking in the background while we're listening to Mr. Shaknovich.
They are on mute, which is strange.
I noticed they are on mute, but a little bit of it is bleeding through, so I wanted to make them aware. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Shaknovich.
So flipping to the second page of the exhibit, the first two items are positions that we're seeking the FTE to full-time equivalency for. There is no proposed revenue or fiscal note associated with that, in that those positions, it's a reallocation internally, and or we receive grant funds to cover those positions. So the accounting and financial operations and a record management technician within human resources, those are recommended for approval within the county executive's operating budget. And again, there's no fiscal note associated with that. Continuing on then, the next item you'll see is pre-kindergarten. So this is obviously in addition to the Carrie Whedon Early Ed Center we spoke about earlier. The council is well aware that expanding pre-kindergarten opportunities is in fact one of the policy priority areas within the state of Maryland, and it was recognized by the Kerwin Commission and later drafted into the two Kerwin-related bills that passed out of Annapolis in the General Assembly. So these 14 positions will allow us to open up additional sections of pre-kindergarten across the county, and for these positions there is state revenue that comes with it to partially offset the costs for these pre-kindergarten seats. Again, they are full day because they must be full day pre-kindergarten in order to be eligible for funding from the state. The Board of Education had requested 2 psychologists in its budget, just under approximately $240,000. One of those psychologists has been included in the recommended budget put forward by the county executive, approximately $119,800. And it's important to know that with all of these positions, that's not just the salary, but that's, you know, the salary and the overhead and the computers and everything else that it takes any of these positions to function, furniture if the case might be, et cetera. So it's not just a salary cost, but it's a fully loaded cost with everything else that allows that position to be successful. Going down the operating budget sheet, one of the priorities of the Board of Education was to make inroads in terms of lowering the student to school counselor ratios that we have across our school district. The Board of Education had requested 15 additional school counselors be allotted to the Board of Education at just over $1.5 million. 9 of those 15 are recommended within the county executive's budget. So approximately $926,000 of revenue apportioned to those 9 school counselors. And then closing out the social emotional element, as Dr. Arlotto said earlier, one of the key areas for the school district in terms of making inroads and supporting our students and our families at all times, but maybe even now more so than ever, given the challenges that all of us are facing, especially our youngest learners. There is one mental health service coordinator. That's a social worker, and that is a position that is also aligns with the Kerwin Commission's work and the recently adopted blueprint bill. There's a state offsetting revenue for that, so the county just has to pick up its match to that, and that is in fact what the county executive's budget before you depicts. And then one additional social worker, which aligns with the one additional social worker request that was put forward by the Board of Education when they adopted their budget. Special education has and continues to be a large focus area here in Anne Arundel County, obviously with a growing student enrollment. A portion of our student body also requires supports in terms of special education students, and we have those broken up into essentially 4 different areas. The first area is our birth to 21 programs. So this is countywide, largely driven by enrollment and number of IEPs that we have to support and the service hours that the students require as a result of those IEPs in those birth to 21 programs. The Board of Education requested 32.8 positions, and in fact 32.8 positions and the full operating budget complement required to support those have been contained within the county executive's proposed budget. The second line item below that, we were notified in late winter. We've had for a long time now a very successful program at Southern High School that we've had a partnership with Kennedy Krieger. And unfortunately, due to circumstances outside of our control, they notified us just this winter. In fact, it was after Dr. Arlotto had even introduced his budget back in December, that they were going to have to unfortunately terminate their program that they had located in Southern High School. Kennedy Krieger is not closing, they're still servicing students. They would just not be able to do that remotely on premises here at Southern High School. It's a highly successful program and allows many of our special education students to obtain their high school diplomas, as the line item says, and therefore the Board of Education requested 11 positions and $420,000 to support the ongoing program there at Southern High School. Madam President, I see a question, and I'm not sure what your preference is in terms of addressing questions now or finishing the presentation and then tackling them all at one time.
I believe we were going to let you get through the operating budget and then ask questions, Mr. Pruski. Is that cool?
That's fine with me. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Sheknovic.
Yeah, thank you again. It's Alex Sheknovich, Chief Operating Officer for the school district, and we don't have much further. The next line item that's highlighted in yellow on your exhibit also relates to special education, and that's for our developmental centers, and those would be the Ruth Parker Eason facility, the Marley Glen Special Facility, and the Central Special Facility. 32 positions to support those developmental centers, and all 32 positions are in fact fully recommended for funding, and the entire $1.6 million funding allocation to support those 32 positions for our developmental centers here in Anne Arundel County. As you know or have heard, year over year when we opened our doors this past September, we enrolled over 1,500 more students than we did the prior year. We anticipate our enrollment to grow yet again in the year ahead. And so the next 3 line items really work in concert with one another. And the best way I can depict that is, in order for us to keep our class size ratios constant as our enrollment increases, we need a commensurate amount of teachers, faculty members, to plug into those grade levels. And we have a staffing grid that provides the ratios from everything from pre-K all the way up to high school classes. And so we run those computations based on our year-over-year enrollment growth, and this is actual. So this is the actual enrollment growth that we saw in September of 2019 over what we had in September 30, 2018. So for those enrollment growth positions, 71 general educators, 11.2 cultural arts, and the cultural arts are things like our music, art, gym, library, media services, things like that, and 2 positions for reading teachers. So all of those positions for enrollment growth year over year, again, these are actual enrollment growth figures, are fully funded for, are fully recommended for funding within the county executive's budget. And as a result of that, we do not anticipate that we are going to see outsized class size increases, at least attributable to this area singularly. I will just divert from the strategy of focusing on what was funded versus what not. In one area, you know that much has been made about classes across this county school district that in fact do unfortunately exceed our staffing, preferred staffing guidelines in terms of student-teacher ratios. And we had set about a course, as the superintendent elaborated upon last year, to make some inroads and hopefully over the course of 4 years, sort of make ourselves whole again and sort of dig us out of the hole that was created staffing-wise across the last, 10, 11, 12 years when simply due to economic constraints and other unfortunate circumstances, we were not able to hire all the teachers that we needed in any given year. But again, as Ms. Corkadell and Dr. Arlotto alluded to, that's not the year we find ourselves in this year. So at the present, the budget put forward by the county executive wouldn't allow us to make inroads in terms of further reductions in class size, student-teacher ratios. But again, with all the positions that were funded, we certainly don't anticipate seeing those class size ratios going negatively in terms of increasing year over year, because fortunately the county executive did include those break-even enrollment positions. And lastly, there is one position for a technology programmer that again does not have a fiscal note. So in terms of the overall budget, if you go to the bottom of the second page, the Board of Education had asked for a total of 564.7 FTE full-time equivalents on a personnel account. In terms of a year-over-year budget, the request was for a $96.6 million year-over-year revenue increase, again, from all sources, restricted and unrestricted. And that would have led to a 7.60% budget increase had it been fully funded. The budget that's been recommended by the county executive has sufficient support for 250.2 FTEs, a year-over-year increase, again, both restricted and unrestricted from all sources combined, of $42.6 million. And that leaves a year-over-year budget increase in aggregate at 3.35%. And with that, Madam President, we've covered everything that's been contained within the county executive's proposed operating budget. Again, we did not go line by line or specifically in what's not presently contained within his recommendation, but certainly we're open to any questions that you and your colleagues have about the entire operating budget in its whole.
Thank you. I'm sure we have numerous questions. Thank you for that report. And Mr. Pruski, your flag is raised. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Andrew Pruski, District 4 County Council. Alex, thank you again. Michelle Corkadell, appreciate you guys reaching out. Dr. Arlotto. and the rest of the staff. I do have a question because I think all the budgets that we've been planning, and this goes for every department agency, we're planning as if things are going to return to be the same. And I say that because there's the budget process you all vetted, so on. If there were any changes that you would recommend, and let me be clear, you all don't know, at least unless you want to share with me something that I don't know, that there won't be the possibility of us not being in school in fall again. Additional staff that might need to support online learning, e-learning, just a difference in priorities. So I don't know if you could just chime in overall, if there's any discussion about things that maybe were missed through the initial process that we might need now. How are things going? Obviously, when we're funding these things, you don't plan for a pandemic. But I would like to hear, though, based upon recent concerns or things that you have, if there's anything else that maybe we missed through the initial process, or we reprioritize, either or. But overall, given the current situation, and I know you don't know again with the fall, but I'd like you to comment on that if you could. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure who actually wants to take that, but Dr. Arlotto, you can assign it to whoever.
Good, glad. I was just unmuting my mic after Mr. Pruski finished. So I think it's a great question. What immediately interesting that we are in the position that we are in now in virtual learning. You will see towards the bottom of the page, bottom page 2, one of the things that our board had built into their requested budget was you'll see a line for virtual school. So we have been in the process of talking about how to begin to build a virtual environment, right? Slowly over time, nothing like we are in today, right? We didn't imagine we'd have to flip the switch in a 24-hour period and go to virtual school. So, so that is something that we'll have to talk about in terms of, or we'll continue to talk about in terms of where we'll have to prioritize some of the things that we're doing so that we can continue to support and better support our students, our parents, and our staff in this virtual environment. We may very well continue into the virtual environment in the fall. We may be in a hybrid place. Many school systems are talking about that. Certainly the Maryland State Department of Education is talking about that. So that's, I just point that out on the budget, Mr. Pruski, that was a line where we have been talking about building over time a virtual program. One of the things that I think we're going to need, we will absolutely have to budget for will be a learning management system, an LMS. It's not something that we own. While we use the Google Suite and some Blackboard a little bit, we do not own an LMS. And so we've put an RFI out on the street to start to get some more information. And eventually we hope to purchase one over before the fall, hopefully sometime over the summer. I say that because, one, that will help us build that will help us strengthen our virtual programming. But two, it's a place where we see possibly spending some of the federal monies, the one-time monies that are coming in our direction. So let's say we're thinking about it, but I'm not sure we'll need to take monies out of this requested budget. To do that, I believe we're gonna look to use some of the federal funds to help us build that.
Thank you, Dr. Arlotto, if you don't mind, Madam Chair. What I would say, though, as we go through this process, the state, may cancel school for the year or provide guidance for the fall. I would certainly appreciate if you, the board, if something comes up, as we go through this process, that there's different priorities that have changed. That'd certainly be helpful to me. So again, thank you for all that you're doing. I just want to do one, commend you on some things. I know that some workers have been shifted to help with the food deliveries, and they don't get a lot of credit. So I just want to thank you guys for reallocating resources to support students, because as you know, it's going through all agencies, but that's something that I would say has been really working really well, and I appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pruski.
Madam Chairman.
Ms. Hare, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I just have one quick question on the teachers for enrollment growth. What is the ratio that you all use to calculate one teacher for how many students that gets you to that 71, 11.2, and 2?
Sure. So it's probably easier if we send that over to you because it's differentiated by grade level. So at the youngest grades, they have a much lower ratio. At the upper grades, they have a higher ratio. But we can send that through Ms. Gray and Madam Auditor, and that could be distributed to the entire council so you have that before you.
That would be awesome. Thank you so much.
Madam Chair, may I interrupt?
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to remind all the council and all speakers to always state your name before you say anything. We have people who are simply calling in and they do not know who is speaking at any given time. So I know it's a pain when you're on your 20th answer, but please state your name before you speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Ms. Fiedler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question about the high school diploma bound, those 11 FTEs. Is that an increase over what Kennedy Krieger had been operating with, or is that the same?
So we're going to be providing the same level of services. It's actually a decrease, but it's a very different model. But all these youngsters have an IEP, so they have to have the same, the correct amount of service hours, the staff ratios, whether they have one-on-one aides or not. So we model the program because we know who the students are. So the program is staffed to support the students, to support the IEPs that are in place, and to allow the student experience to be no different than what they previously had while the Kennedy Krieger non-public institution was supporting that program.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Rodvian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Councilwoman Rodvian. I have a handful of questions, so I'll just start with one and you can come back to me. I was curious about that increase that had been requested for the community ambassadors. Was that, it looked like there weren't additional FTEs that went with that request. Was that a compensation increase for those positions?
So Alex Shaknovich, Chief Operating Officer. So those are they're hourly paid employees. They're not FTE benefit positions. So the additional $66.8 thousand would have allowed us to bring on additional people and additional hours within that category, but they are not benefit earning full-time Board of Education employees. But certainly the $66.8 thousand again would have allowed more hours, more people to be brought on to support those expanded services.
Was the intent, would that have been one more person or not necessarily calculatable by person since it's really about hours?
So the answer is no. It's essentially a funding source to support it. Also, the city of Annapolis had previously supported this initiative and they withdrew their financial support from the city. So part of this is also to backfill the cut that the city of Annapolis imposed upon us. Otherwise, there would be a potential reduction in services would we not fund this.
So the level that would be without this increase will allow for a continued level of service and won't require a decrease in service? Or without this, will it be a decrease in service?
So again, Alex Shaknovich, it will be a decrease in service without this funding because the revenues that we had previously received from the city has been removed.
Thank you. I very much, Councilwoman Rodby, and I appreciate your explanation.
Mr. Volke has a question. We can come back to you, Ms. Rodvian, okay?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nathan Volke. Thank you for the presentation. So I want to just jump to the pre-K full day funding that you have in here, 14 new positions. And is there any state money or federal money that's coming in, or is that us funding that on our own? Is this some kind of match that if we do this, we get more money or something? I just want to find out.
Yeah, Alex Shaknovich from the school system. Yes, there is a pretty sizable state funding contingent that goes with that. So the county government is not paying 100% of the costs. If the positions are not funded, then some of the state revenue that you'll see at the top of your exhibit would be retracted as well.
And how much would that be?
We can get you the breakdowns of
Okay.
what percentage from the state versus what percentage of the county.
Thank you. I'll have more, but that's enough for now.
Madam Chair.
Ms. Hare?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Jessica Hare, District 7. Just to follow up on that, when Mr. Steknovich, when you send over the information on the breakdown for the Teachers for Enrollment Growth, could you send us a breakdown on the pre-K in terms of where you see them going, or how many students that would accommodate for, things like that?
Alex Shaknovich with the school district. Yes, absolutely. And as you know, as part of our capital program, we've been working with the state and the county government over a course of many years to actually expand the amount of classrooms we have for full day kindergarten as well as pre-kindergarten opportunities. So there's capital funding that's already been put in place, and we're leveraging the space that's been constructed. But we will certainly provide you a list of where these positions will be going. And just so you know, it's really a combination of two things, because to qualify for state money, we actually have to provide a full day pre-kindergarten opportunity. So part of the funding will be to take existing half-day sessions that would not be eligible for state funding and to upgrade them to full-day sessions, therefore making us eligible for state funding. The other portion of the funding, and again, we'll get you the details, will be for new classes of pre-K where they previously didn't exist. And we'll be very careful to itemize both of them so you can see the details.
Thank you so much.
Ms. Rodvian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Councilwoman Rodvian. I had a question about the special ed positions and the birth to 21 positions. I know that those positions are both extremely important in terms of supporting our students that receive special education services, but I wanted to, on the flip side of that, just ask I also know that there's a teacher shortage in some areas, and I'm curious if those, have you been able to fill all of the positions in those two areas that you have, that we have funded in the past, or has that been successful in getting the actual funding levels? Because I noticed that both of those, it's a substantial number of teachers, and if it's doable, obviously I want to do everything to support that. But I just want to know, has that been doable in the past? Have you been able to fill those positions?
So the short answer is yes, but I'm sorry, this is George Arlotto, Superintendent of Schools. Councilwoman Robbie, and the short answer is yes. We had a great hiring season this past what is now our current school year. We hired well over 1,000 teachers in combination with other positions, and that's a lot for us. Normally we average around 10%, around 600 positions during a spring and summer hiring season. I can't guarantee that we will find every position that were allotted, but we had a very good hiring season, and even in this telework circumstance that we find ourselves in, our HR department is out there still recruiting and interviewing and signing candidates on for this upcoming school year. So we feel confident we'll be able to fill positions. But as you alluded to, special ed is one of those difficult to hire, and so that's the reason that we have tried to get out front early during this hiring season to try and secure some of those folks.
Ms. Fiedler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilwoman Fiedler, how are we recruiting, or how's the department recruiting under the current circumstances? And are those levels that you believe can be filled, for instance, birth to 21 at 32.8, under the current circumstances that we will be in for the foreseeable future?
George Arlotto, Superintendent of Schools. Councilwoman Fiedler, we, as I alluded to in my previous response, our Human Resource Office has continued to operate at full steam. We're just not doing it face to face. So we are, that team is out talking to candidates, meaning virtually, as we are doing now. They're conducting virtual interviews and reviewing information with candidates and continuing to do that work. Again, I think I'm pretty confident the team will be able to bring candidates on. One of the things that we are talking with the Maryland State Department of Education is you are recruiting particularly teachers that are just finishing their degree programs now for hopefully hiring into the future. They have to have a certain number, of course, of not only just course credits, but they've got to have a certain number of hours in their internship work in schools. And of course, that's been cut short because they can't get into schools that are closed to do their student teaching. And so the Maryland State Department of Education has waived some of those requirements into the fall for students to complete their internships and to complete their praxis exams. So the state recognizes that, the whole country recognizes it, but certainly Maryland State Department of Education recognizes that that's a concern for us hiring in Maryland, that could lessen the number of teachers that are available. So they are reducing some of those requirements temporarily so we can hire them, bring them on board full time while they then finish that work.
Okay, and if I may ask a follow-up question, Amanda Fiedler here. With regard to special education, I know some of the positions are one-on-one aid specific, and those aides cannot go out to the homes right now to help those students with their work currently. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so they would not be able to do the job until we return to normal or hybrid of some sort.
So George Arlotto, Superintendent of Schools, no. The answer is we are like teachers that have created their Google Classrooms, their virtual classrooms, to interact with their students. Our TAs have done much of the same. TSAs are reaching out to students that they would normally provide side-by-side, shoulder-to-shoulder, if you will, supports. In a brick and mortar classroom, they are reaching out to students, so the student may engage in a general ed lesson, and then that TA would reach out virtually and then meet with that student one-on-one, or bring a small group together in a format like this virtually to then lend assistance and offer supports and accommodations to students as best they can in this environment.
Great, thank you, that's helpful.
Councilman Volkey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to turn back to the Kennedy Krieger Institute project that we were talking about at Southern High School. So as it sounded when you were talking about it, Mr. Sheknovich, it sounded like basically this was something that a private entity was doing and operating in the school that now they're no longer going to be able to do at the school, but they'll still be offering it. It sounded like it just wouldn't be on site. And so instead of us continuing to work through that program off-site, we're taking it in-house. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes. So George Arlotto, Superintendent of Schools. Yes, Mr. Volkey, the plan would be for us to then take that on in-house. You're right. This is a non-public entity, Kennedy Krieger. They do wonderful work and work with a number of our students, not only inside some of our buildings, but also at some of their own campuses, Baltimore and other places. What this does do for us by taking on this, one, we know the students and would look forward to keep them in-house and with us. That's always our goal. 100% of the time when we can to keep our students that have special needs with us. There are certain, some of those students, we simply can't provide for all of their needs. So sometimes they need to go to non-publics away from our buildings. What this will do is this will eliminate transportation for those students. We would be required to transport them, say, to Baltimore for them to remain in that program. And we certainly would anticipate that the tuition costs would increase for us. Anytime we have a partnership with a non-public special ed group like that, we get and they do work inside of our buildings because we are taking on the overhead, we get a reduced enrollment cost for them. And so we can see those costs both going up if we have to send the students away and for transportation. And those are two of the reasons that we like to keep them in-house. But most importantly, because we think that we know we can provide the services for these students in that atmosphere.
And I appreciate that. I guess my only follow-up would be, do you have anything that shows sort of the cost-benefit analysis of this is the expected tuition increase, this is the expected cost for transportation, vis-a-vis taking this on in-house and what that's going to cost? Are we certain that, I understand your desire to keep the students in the school system, in the school building, and I get that. There's a value to that. I just want to know what the flip side of it looks like in terms of a financial standpoint. So if we could get that information, it would help.
George Arlotta, Superintendent of Schools, we'd be glad to share that with you. We can give you our best guess. Of course, one of the variables is with that program dispersing, and if we're able to offer hours, we then have to sit down and conduct individual meetings with each family to make sure that that's the appropriate setting for that student. So, but we'll actually can give you the breakdown on transportation and other costs related to having to now depart with that program and send the students elsewhere. We'll get that to you and your colleagues.
Thank you.
Ms. Rodvian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Councilwoman Rodvian. So I know that you've got to be in a difficult situation planning for multiple contingencies for next year. I'm sorry, are you able to hear me? I've got a helicopter going over my, okay, good. I know you're in a difficult position planning for, all different kinds of situations that we might have for the end of the school year, not to mention next year. And I know that currently the rule with respect to Chromebooks for students or for families that don't have them is one Chromebook per family. So at least there is access, to a device in the home. But I also know that in families that have multiple children, that has, that has been a difficulty. Is that something that is on your radar in terms of using that federal funding to, increase the number of Chromebooks that might be able to, for the family with 5 children, for example?
George Arlotta, Superintendent of Schools. Yes, Ms. Rodvian, we put a team together to sort of map out how we might best use that grant money, that federal grant money that's passing through MSDE. So we've got several weeks to plan for that, and then we'll submit for approval through the Maryland State Department of Education for use of those funds. Certainly technology is one of those at the top of our list, but let me be clear that anybody's ability to buy devices, Chromebooks, right now is very limited, right? There is, because of supply chain and access, we just can't order them and get them delivered tomorrow or a week from now. We ordered, as we got into this process, we put in an order for about 1,000 more Chromebooks as replacement and as needed. We probably won't see those until the end of May. And anything that we order from this point forward could be well into June or the fall. But those are things that we'll have to sort of contingent and plan on. So yes, we certainly could use that money. One of our concerns is certainly we've distributed over 10,000 Chromebooks now. We know there will be a percentage of those that will not return to us or not return in good working order. And so we're going to need we plan on using some of those federal funds for replacement, because when we do go back into schools, when we do go back into classrooms, we need those Chromebooks. as you're well aware from your experience, we need those Chromebooks for the daily instruction of our students when we are inside our building. So it is, I won't say it's a difficult place, but between supplying what we can now and then replacing what we may need to replace in the future for Chromebooks that don't come back to us. Let me go back to this, another part of your question, which was Chromebooks in multiple family. I mean, a Chromebook with multiple children in the family that need access. So we needed to start somewhere. So we had to prioritize with our initial 10,000 for those students that didn't have one at all, for those seniors, those students taking community college courses, our homeless students. We needed to prioritize the need. And so if there is a family that has, let's say, 4 children in the family, all trying to get online, and they have a single Chromebook, they should contact their school principal or principals and request an additional Chromebook. But we don't have one for one. We don't have 85,000 Chromebooks. But if there are families that are really in need, you should contact their principals. We've gone from sort of large scale distribution, Ms. Rodvian, that you're well aware of, now down to school by school, and the principals are dealing with those individual needs on a school by school basis.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am.
Miss Lacey, do you have your hand raised? Miss Lacey, you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, well, yes, this is Sarah Lacey, Council District 1 with my pre-kindergartner who visits just because I raised my hand, I think, to ask a question. So she's got perfect timing. I have a question about transportation. When I looked at the activity buses and the 8 positions there and the bus aides where there were 7, and then you have staffing with 1, is that staffing that goes with these buses, or is that staffing part of a general office position for the Office of Transportation?
This is Alex Shaknovich with the school system. So there's actually 2 different components there. So for example, 3, I'm sorry, activity buses. We currently support activity buses at the middle school level to help students who participate in clubs or other co-curricular activities. We do not do that at the high school level. Certainly we have buses for our competitive athletic teams, things like that, but not high school level buses to support clubs and other after school activities like that. So the first line item is simply dollars for additional contracted services, such that we could run a activity bus per high school at least once a week. So that's the first item. The second transportation related item, bus aids. This is for aides, not for drivers. This is for aides that would go on our buses. They could be our non-publics, they could be our special education buses, but they would work with the driver and support the students in terms of, ensuring student behavior and safety and any other accommodations and supports that the students might require. Again, typically in a non-public or special ed type of environment. Those are the bus aids. The transportation staffing, those 7 positions are correlated with the transportation consulting report that was released just this past winter, and recommended some additional staffing to be put in place to support the transportation department. So these are not drivers, these are folks like routers, communication specialists, driver trainers, things like that. But again, this would be to support the Department of Transportation, not be behind the wheels of the proverbial bus.
All right, so just to follow up on that then, if you had the 8 positions for activity buses, we would then have at least 1 activity bus run from each high school in the county every week?
So again, as Alex Shakno, Chief Operating Officer, the activity buses, and I know it's pretty small type, does not have any positions, and there's no FTEs associated with it. It's simply $570,000 that would allow us to buy additional contractual services from our 17 or 18 contracted bus drivers to provide an activity bus at a minimum of once per week to each of our 13 comprehensive high schools.
Okay, thank you for that. I see that now. I think I need the little ellipses that go all the way across the line over to the numbers on the right. Thank you.
Ms. Rodvian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I found my flag. My husband, AKA my temporary office assistant, was kind enough to bring it to me. My last question is regarding an issue that is not on this paper, but has been an ongoing concern among my constituents, and that is the lead findings that we've been looking at over the last year or so, and to find out, does the budget that you've been requested, first off, are there any additional needs for lead remediation at this point? And if there are the resources to to actually perform those mitigations available in this budget?
Alex Shaknovich with the school district. So let me rewind that and give you a more full answer of that. So there is a very detailed and specific testing protocol that's put in place by the Maryland Department of Environment. And part of that is that the testing can only occur when the building is in full and regular use. So not just here in Anne Arundel County, but statewide, all of the lead and water testing as it relates to schools has been suspended, and that became effective when the state superintendent temporarily shuttered the schools to students. So that's on the testing side. However, we have results, and we continue to get results from schools that had been tested before the state superintendent temporarily shuttered the schools to students. And so we are acting on those. So we, be they in-house and contractual service, plumbers, et cetera, are changing out fixtures, et cetera. So that is actively in the works. There's been no cessation to those activities. But we will get to the point that obviously we would have satisfied all those work orders. The state law does not allow those fixtures to then be turned back on until another test is done and the newly replaced fixtures have been certified as being compliant with the state's lead standard. Again, with the testing being temporarily halted by the actions promulgated by the state superintendent, we're not in a position to retest those fixtures. So the budget that we have before us today in terms of the operating budget does not diminish our capacity to test, nor does it diminish our ability to proactively continue to pursue fixture change outs, et cetera. But there is a temporary pause with respect to the Maryland Department of the Environment testing protocol.
Thank you, Mr. Shaknovich. I appreciate the explanation.
Ms. Fiedler.
Thank you. Councilwoman Fiedler here. Could you just give a brief description of our developmental centers and what the 32 positions would help to alleviate?
Thank you. George Arlotta, Superintendent of Schools. So our the positions, those 32 positions in developmental centers are fit into 3 categories. They are for teachers, they are for teaching assistants, and they are for permanent substitutes. So we have been working over time in our developmental centers to bring our class size ratio down, student to teacher, over the last couple of years. And this would be, of the 32 positions, 9 of those would be teachers. And those 9 teachers would help us then spread those teachers across the various needs and help us continue to bring down the class size ratio. The TAs in that 3212 are set aside for teaching assistants. And the need there, as we have continued to work with our developmental centers, is and let me put it all together: 12 teaching assistants and 11 permanent substitutes. Councilwoman Fiedler, and the idea is that when we have certainly students in the development centers have a great many needs, so having additional TAs on hand, and they're needed throughout the day, not necessarily and in different places than necessarily one-on-one next to a student. And the same holds true for permanent substitutes. We just can't call into the substitute and just bring in anybody to be a substitute for a teacher or a TA that's in one of our developmental centers, because the needs are so great with those students. And so by bringing in more of those folks into each of our 3 developmental centers, we'll have greater access and greater coverage across the building. And then the principals will be able to move those folks around as needed. For example, a student, you could have a TA in a classroom with a student and then get called out to go down to the pool to help another TA pull a student from the pool, what we call a 2-man lift. And that's not something a single person could do, but then that leaves a TA leaving the classroom to go assist somewhere else. Completely appropriate and needed, but by having additional TAs that are not assigned to students based on their IEPs, then we can spread them out across the building to assist in some of those areas.
Thank you, Dr. Arlotto. I just needed a refresher, and Amanda Fiedler, Council 5, or District 5. I just needed a quick reminder from last year, because the developmental centers are more school-centered. And then when we're looking at the positions for birth to 21, that is the infants and toddlers, child find, and beyond, correct? More outside of the brick and mortar.
Correct, right. So those, right, it is, the developmental centers are very specific to 3 buildings themselves, while the birth to 21 could be those folks that are going out into the community and working with newborns, working with families of newborns, or your general needed special education teacher in a high school or
Great.
a middle school or an elementary.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Councilman Volkey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize if I missed it. I had to step off for a moment. And so if this question's already been asked, please just tell me and I'll go back and watch it. But I guess my question was on the special ed positions that you've got here in this budget. To what extent are you seeing an increase in enrollment numbers in special education students in the schools versus how much of this is trying to bring down the class size and have more resources in the classroom?
George Arlotto, Superintendent of Schools. Mr. Volkey, I don't have the number in front of me, but I'll get you and your colleagues the numbers. But it is it's a little bit of both to answer your question. So we do, in the case of the special centers, we want to bring the class size down, the ratio down because of the needs. The other side of the coin, as you mentioned, is that with the increased enrollment, then certainly percentage-wise, we're going to increase the number of special education students we have, and therefore we need to maintain those needs, right? So if our enrollment increased by 1,500 students, we hovered about 10, 11% of our overall population is of special needs, which means we're going to need 10 or 11% of that overall enrollment growth numbers teachers to be dedicated to special education. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense. I guess I just like to see what the numbers are in terms of what enrollment growth you're seeing compared to other places. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilwoman Lacey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sarah Lacey, Council District 1. As a follow-up to Councilman Volkey's question, I had a similar question about the board's request for ELA teachers and bilingual assistants. Hopefully I wrote that down correctly. As far as the number of positions, and actually read it correctly this time. It wasn't clear to me looking at that whether the numbers they were requesting are still considered, are they considered to be due to enrollment growth or meeting an overall need that we just haven't been able to fill? And also the bilingual facilitators. To me, they seem like they might be in the same category, but perhaps you parse them out differently. So I'd like to understand that better.
Yes, ma'am. George Arlotto, Superintendent of Schools. So they are very different. We utilize those positions very differently. Let me start with the latter, which are the bilingual facilitators. Those are folks that are working primarily with parents and helping parents navigate the school system, doing translations, but helping them navigate the school system, registrations, and they are assigned when a family comes through our International Welcome Center and registers. They will then be assigned a bilingual facilitator based on what school they attend. Each bilingual facilitator has a cluster of schools that they work directly with and those families. The ELA teachers, those language acquisition teachers, we have been working diligently in a fair number of positions in last year's budget. So thank you to you and your colleagues to help us begin to bring those class size, those ratios down. It's not necessarily a class size ratio, but it's a ratio of the number of students and ESOL teacher is working with. They each have a caseload. And so that could be, I think right now it's hovering at about 45 to 1. And we have been working to try and, as we can hire more, bring those ESOL teacher numbers down. Again, you could have an ESOL teacher that is assigned a school building because the enrollment is so high of students of need, of English language acquisition need. And you can have a ELA teacher that could be assigned to 2 or 3 different buildings. And so they're moving about to those different schools during the week. But the bottom line is they have a caseload and we're trying to reduce that caseload.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, you are muted.
Well, that's a first. So I'm not seeing any more questions for the operating budget. Are my colleagues ready to move on to the capital budget?
Madam Chair,
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Rodvian.
I don't know if this is allowed in this scenario, but would it be possible to take just a very brief recess?
Madam Chair, can you unmute?
Oh, yes, yes. We can take, shall we say 5 minutes, a very tight 5 minutes, and we'll come back for the capital budget? Great. We are recessed for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, we need a motion, please. Motion in a second.
May I have a motion to recess for 5 minutes?
So moved, Councilwoman Rodvian.
May I have a second?
Second, Lacey.
Do we need to vote?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, we'll recess for 5 minutes, coming back at 2:35. Thank you. Okay, thank you, everybody. We are back in session with the Board of Education. We are moving forward with the capital budget. President Corkadell, Dr. Arlotto, Mr. Sheknovic. Mr. Sheknovic, are you leading this conversation as well? Great. You have the floor.
Thank you. For the record, Alex Sheknovich, Chief Operating Officer for Anne Arundel County Schools, to review the FY21 capital budget as well as the 6-year capital improvement plan. The council should have an exhibit with red, white, and blue font on it. And we'll walk through the exhibit using this as our basis. And so the exhibit is structured in the following manner. The first page talks about the FY21 capital improvement program from all funding sources. The second page, and again, we'll loop back to some of this. The second page disaggregates the FY21 request into where the funding is coming from, whether it's county funded or whether it's coming from an external source such as the state or the federal government. And then the final 2 pages are the 6-year plan. Again, indicating alignment or lack of alignment between the Board of Education's request in the out-year program versus that recommended by the county executive. So we'll cover those pages in turn, but we'll initially focus our attention on the very first page, which again juxtaposes the Board of Education's FY 2021 capital budget request with that recommended by the county executive on May 1st. And the color scheme is essentially as follows. So those line items that you see banded in a white font indicate that there is an exact match between what was initially requested from the Board of Education and that which has been recommended within the county executive's budget. So for example, and I'll just do this randomly, Board of Education priority number 12, you'll see is Edgewater Elementary School. The Board of Education had asked for an additional $5.56 million to complete the construction efforts there at Edgewater Elementary School, and you'll see that the county executive's budget fully funds that request. And therefore it's a match, and that's why it's banded in that white font. I will differentiate that again just for orientation purposes with the line items that are depicted in a blue font. So any items that are depicted in a blue font show an area where there is not a match between what the Board of Education initially requested and that which is being recommended for funding within the county executive's May 1st budget recommendation. And remember that simply not being a match isn't always a bad thing. So I'll show you 2 different examples. And again, we'll go into the details, but this is just part of the orientation process. So in the very first line item number 1, health and safety, you'll see that the Board of Education requested $1.2 million to support health and safety related infrastructure improvements within the schools. And the county executive's budget proposes $500,000. So there is not a match, and that's why it's banded in blue. And you'll see that the county recommendations, county executive's recommendation is lower than what the Board of Education requested. And I will just drastically juxtapose that against line item number 30. So line item number 30 is the public school military installation grant, where the Board of Education had requested $4.8 million. The county executive's budget supports a $24.5 million appropriation authority increase. So therefore, in that category, the recommendation from the county executive exceeds what was initially put forward by the Board of Education. And again, we'll go into details, but that's largely because we were notified very recently and have shared the information both with Madam Auditor's Office and the county administration that the school district is receiving an increase in the federal grant that had been awarded for the renovation and expansion of Meade High School. So it's not a match, but again, it's a positive match in that the appropriation authority is greater. And then finally, those that are banded in a red font on that page will document line items that were requested by the Board of Education and are not included in FY21 at all in the county executive's proposal. And you see there's 2, line item 19 for West County Elementary School design and line item 26 for the Timms electrical upgrade FY21. So we'll go from the top and we'll talk about each line item briefly, and then if you can allow me to get through the end of this worksheet, Madam President, then I think we can loop back for questions just like we did with the operating budget. So health and safety, the Board of Education requested $1.2 million, $500,000 of it is proposed. And this is a line item that we use to fund, again, as the name applies, health and safety type of improvements at schools. So it can be things like fire alarm replacements, environmental systems, et cetera, things that again support the health and safety in a school building. The Board of Education requested $1.2 million, $500,000 of it is being recommended. And if you can just briefly turn to page 2, and I'm not gonna give you a headache by having you flipping back and forth all day, but you'll see in the second to the far right-hand column on page 2 of your exhibit, you'll see that the request was for $500,000 is being recommended. None of that $500,000 is coming from a state or federal source. So that is all going to be coming from county or local sources. And again, I'm not going to be doing that on each and every line item, but I'll just point out that there's no external state or county funding support for that. The next line item is security related upgrades, $2.3 million. 500 is the request from the board. This would be for things like continued construction of the double layered security vestibules that we have ongoing at our schools, things like camera and other intrusion detection or alert systems. It can be fencing or other natural obstacles that we place to protect schools from both individual or potentially vehicular type of intrusions, et cetera. Again, the Board of Education requested $2.3 million. $500,000 is recommended for funding. I will note that on the second page, you'll see no external funding source towards that. There is a potential, though, that we may be receiving some state funding for that. The General Assembly has designated some funding for that area. It has not been released, to the best of our knowledge, by the governor as of yet. And we do not have any documentation of federal funding. And therefore, state funding. And therefore, since I am unable to certify those funds to the satisfaction of the county's comptroller or to Madam Auditor's office, those other funding sources aren't there. Certainly, as soon as we're notified of that, we would let you know that, and humbly request that a supplemental get introduced at some later point in time, should we be fortunate enough to get any state funding. But again, there is a decrease at the moment from $2.3 million down to $500,000 for those security related features. During the operating budget portion, I had spoke about our ongoing effort to construct pre-K and full-day kindergarten facilities. So rewinding the clock, a long time ago, in 2005, in fact, the state superintendent of schools mandated that all schools within Maryland provide a full-day kindergarten opportunity. We entered into a partnership with the county government and with the state government to, over the course of many years, construct permanent additions onto our buildings to support full-day kindergarten. And we've been doing that ever since the 2005 year. We have 4 projects left in the county, 2 of which we wanted to undertake in FY21, and the remaining 2 would have been undertaken in FY22. We'd asked for $9 million in total support for those projects, a combination of state and local monies. To date, the state of Maryland has not designated that they would be providing funding for those projects as of yet. I will say that the IAC, the Interagency Commission on School Construction, has not concluded their work for this year. That typically does happen in the month of May. It's very unfortunate that the timing is such that the IAC does not conclude their work before the county executive releases his budget here in Anne Arundel County. That is the way it is every year. So we hopefully do anticipate getting some final state funding recommendations sometime later this month. And again, we will share that as promptly as possible with the administration and with the auditor's office to try to true any of those up. But again, at the moment, $9 million was the request, again, inclusive of both state and county funding. $5.5 million, all county funding, is the recommendation being put forth by the county executive. And again, so that would be for the 2 for FY21, and then we would come back for 1 more year in FY22 with 2 additional school requests, and we would have essentially been out of the kindergarten construction business. I will say we don't all know what the pre-kindergarten construction future will still hold. That is to some extent predicated on what the ultimate trajectory is going to be of the Kerwin Commission's work and the Maryland Blueprint Plan. So TBD in that regard, but we don't have the information at hand today to be able to elaborate further upon that. Systemics, line item 4, that is for the replacement of large building components. So a building component can be things like the heating system or the cooling system, the electrical distribution system, et cetera, within a building. It is funded jointly by both state and county funding for a discrete list of building elements that are eligible for that. We requested $20.5 million worth of combined funding from both the state and county. We did receive some state support to date and some additional county support, but those 2 numbers put together is about $2.5 million, just about 10% of the funding that we had hoped to have for those large-scale building component replacements. Maintenance backlog is monies that we utilize to support the replacement or upgrade of building elements, typically that are not eligible for state support. So things like concrete, things like windows, for example, certainly floor coverings, be they tile or carpeting or stairs, et cetera. There's a very short list of what the state will pay for. There's a very long list of what the state will not participate in. And the maintenance backlog is that funding line that allows us to attack those. By the measures that the state has in terms of building age here in Anne Arundel County, the latest release figures from the State Department of General Services positions Anne Arundel County as having the fifth oldest infrastructure within the state of Maryland in terms of its age or adjusted age, so the 5th oldest. That is a signal to you and I that there are many, many building elements that have exceeded their design or their engineered life system capacity, and therefore need to be either comprehensively replaced or significantly upgraded to continue to support their function. We'd ask for $7 million from the county government. Again, no state funding eligible in this line item. $3.65 million has been allocated towards that. I believe the maintenance, comprehensive maintenance plan that was shared with the council back in September, if you go back, and certainly it's available online, you'll see that in terms of that category alone, we've got something on the order of $385 million worth of maintenance backlog line items. So at the present, we'll be able to apply this $3.6 million against a $385 million or so backlog. Roof replacements, we requested $3 million. $2 million is the recommended funding level there, and that's for the replacement of either entire roofs or portions of a building that have exceeded its life capacity, as well as periodic recoating of the roofs to allow the roof to actually achieve its engineered life cycle durability. So $3 million was requested, $2 million approved. Again, no state dollars in that category. Relocatable classrooms. We use relocatable classrooms really as temporary, to handle temporary or transient enrollment surges that may be going through a school, or maybe support a school that's undergoing construction activity to construct, to allow for swing space, so we can move students out into a temporary room while their classroom's being renovated prior to them being put back into the classroom. We'd requested $1.5 million. And this is for the relocation of existing classroom buildings. We are not in the mode of buying new relocatable classrooms. So this is simply to relocate classrooms potentially from a building that's now is completed construction, or maybe the enrollment may at a select site be experiencing a downturn, and maybe an adjoining school is experiencing an uptick. So we would relocate the building, the portable classroom, from A to B. Again, the request is $500,000 below the board's initial request, and there's no state funding for that category. The next three line items were fully funded, so I'll go through those just very quickly. The $600,000 for asbestos abatement, the $350,000 for barrier-free access. Barrier-free access is a code word for ADA and accessibility upgrades, and $800,000 for school bus replacements. Looping back on those three, as you may recall, that asbestos was a building material that was perfectly legal and permissible for use up to about 1981. It was during President Reagan's term when it got banned from use, largely banned from use as a building construction material. But if you recall, I said that we've got about the fifth oldest building fleet in the entire state of Maryland, which means that many of our buildings were built before that ban in that 1981 timeframe. So we do continue to have a program to manage and place the asbestos, as well as remove asbestos here from our school buildings. ADA, it's an ever evolving iterative process in that we're trying to accommodate our students as they move from building to building, clearly meet both student and staff needs, comply with the ADA laws, and keep up with the ever evolving regulatory environment, because the ADA codes do change over time. So the $350,000 allows us to do that. And then finally, here within the state of Maryland, school buses are allowed to operate for a 12-year lifespan. After the 12th year, they have to be retired from service and cannot be used for the transport of public students, public school students here within the state of Maryland. So this $800,000 allows us to, that cyclical replacement cycle, as those now 12th year old buses are exiting out of the system, we have to replace them on the front side with new buses. Building Additions is a program that creates capacity. So it's different than the kindergarten additions, which have a specific programmatic purpose that I spoke to earlier. But additions are capacity level additions. And in FY21, this is for one very specific purpose. It is to put a large classroom addition, 11 rooms, as well as a cafeteria expansion on Arundel Middle School. We'd asked for a total of $11 million from both the state and the county to support that. The recommended budget request is for $9.688 million, not the $11 million that we had initially requested. And on the second page, you'll see the breakdown of what portion of that is coming from the state versus what portion of that is coming from the county. The next three schools, Edgewater, Tyler Heights, and Richard Henry Lee, are schools that are actively in construction and have been so. We're in the second year of construction at all of those schools. They're occupied while they are being renovated. So we're renovating those schools around the youngsters in terms of Edgewater and Tyler Heights. For Richard Henry Lee, we had the good fortune of being able to relocate them temporarily over to Cork Middle School as a temporary housing arrangement until those projects are completed. This is the remaining year of construction funding. They have been recommended for full funding, and as you'll see on the second page, the vast majority of that funding for those three projects is actually coming from the state. The county government had aggressively forward funded those construction projects, and now the state's coming to basically make us whole for those projects. The next four schools in a row, Quarterfield, Hillsmere, Rippling Woods, and Old Mill West High School, are partially funded, and that's why they're banded in blue. The Board of Education had undertaken feasibility studies for Quarterfield, Hillsmere, Rippling Woods, they were voted by the Board of Education as being candidates for replacement schools. The state of Maryland independently vetted those projects, and in all three cases, the state of Maryland also agreed that they should be replacement schools. They're not viable candidates for renovations, which is different than Edgewater, Tyler Heights, and Richard Henry Lee. They simply passed the point where on a life cycle costing basis, it's beneficial to salvage those buildings. So they were designated as replacement schools. Designs are actively in progress for all three, Quarterfield, Hillsmere, and Rippling Woods. While the funding is slightly less than what the Board of Education requested, we do not see that the funding decrease is going to create a ripple effect in terms of our ability to open those schools at the time in the year that we had originally contemplated. So the overall project cost actually doesn't reduce. The funding that was trimmed off of the FY21 capital budget, I would suspect largely due to capital debt affordability concerns. Mr. Beecham spoke to those Friday afternoon when we were all together. While the costs are trimmed off of the FY21 program, you'll see those costs reappeared or simply shifted into the out years. So a $3 million cut in FY21 is going to have to come back as an increase in FY22 to make the project whole. Old Mill West High School is a brand new ground up high school construction. I spoke earlier about Crofton High School being the most recent high school. This would be the next school after Crofton that we've had the ability to build from ground up. This would be on the piece of property that the county government acquired. For the benefit of the Board of Education, the county government still has title to that property, and they would transfer that over to the school system by operation of deed at a future date when we're ready to construct. Certainly, we don't need title to that property, nor would want title of that property until that time came. Designs are actively under works. In the works, we've been sharing documents with the state and the county permitting reviewers, be they on the building permit side, be they on the traffic engineering side, the different environmental offices, et cetera. That's all progressing very well. You'll see that the amount of monies for the project has been reduced from from 68.3 million down to 32 million. Again, the cost of the project doesn't decrease. This would still allow us to break ground on that project. We would have to recover those funds in the out years, year 2, 3, or 4 of that construction. That project will be slated for a September, in the scenario, a September of 2024 opening. So we would simply have to recover that delta between now and then to keep that building on track. Line item 19, the West County Elementary School. So this would be a ground up construction project in west of 301, south of Watchapel Road, east of Patuxent Rivers, in an area that largely coincide with what many of you may know as for example, the Two Rivers large project. The county government recently went through a property acquisition process that was supported by the administration, and Madam President, you and your colleagues, voted for the property acquisition. That has gone through. It's cleared, settled. So the county government now does own this the property for the project. This would have been for the money to design the school. So that is not funded in the FY21 capital improvement plan. And then we'll see later that that project is not funded in the 6-year plan either. So we now own the land, but we will not be in a position to either design or construct that school, at least in the version of the current year CIP and the 6-year plan that's been put before you. And that's why it's in red here, and we'll cover the 6-year plan a little bit later in this afternoon's presentation. Old Mill Middle School South, which is the next piece of the Old Mill project, the layering or peeling back the layers of the onion project. This would be built on Southgate Park. Southgate Park is land that the Board of Education initially owned. We transferred that to the county. The county government has been using that for recreation and parks activities. And the arrangement was always, when the day comes, the county would transfer that back to us. This fully funds the design process for that project. We would be just like the Old Mill West High School. We would be collaboratively designing that in conjunction with county recreation and parks to make sure that the finished product at Old Mill Middle School South, just like at Old Mill West High School, will be able to support the needs of both recreation and parks and the school district. This does fully fund the the design portion for the Old Mill Middle School South and the feasibility elements for that. Health room modifications, as you know, the county government supports and pays for the salaries of the school health nurses. The school health nurses are stationed in our buildings. Their office, examination space, et cetera, has to meet standards that are set forth by both the federal, state, and county government. The health department inspects those rooms and identifies what upgrades are required within the existing health rooms to make them not only functional, but also comport with those federal, state, or county government issued regulatory mandates. We'd asked for $350,000 to support the health room improvements that your county health department had requested of us. $200,000 of that is funded. There is no state element to support that. Upgrades of various schools or programmatic improvements. So, for example, will be improvements of space in like upgrades to science labs or upgrades to vocational ed space at our Cat South facility, for example, the culinary arts program. So these are programmatic improvements to existing spaces to bring that space up to the level that it can properly support the instruction of delivery as we are doing it today versus 1963 or 1968 or whenever we initially constructed that space. $800,000 was requested, $400,000 is recommended, and there is no state support for that category. Just like the county government, we do have a fleet of vehicles, dump trucks, forklifts, lawn cutting equipment, et cetera, plumbing trucks that we use for our maintenance and operations and logistical personnel, such as our mail delivery system. $400,000 was requested, and that is what is fully supported by the county administration's version of the budget. Aging Schools is a project where the state pays for 100% of the construction of a project. It's a very small but narrowly tailored state program to get after a very specific and discrete category of work in aging schools across all 24 jurisdictions. They do not pay for the design or permit or inspection elements. So it is largely funded by the state. The county typically only has about a $60,000 match to something north of a $500,000 state funding element. So it's a pretty good return on investment. TIM stands for Technology in Maryland Schools. This program began in 2001. This is the woods of supported the very last school in the list of a journey that began back in 2001. That would be for Lindale Middle School. We'd requested $175,000, some of it in state funding, some of it in county funding to complete the last school. And we would have put the TIMS program to bed. That's currently not recommended for funding either by the state or by the county administration's proposal. Again, we don't have the final numbers from the state, and we hope to soon. Playground equipment improvements really serves two purposes. The main purpose is to ensure the safety and usability of our playground. Many of those playground systems actually still date back to when the school was initially constructed. So many of those playground systems are 40, 50, yes, over 60 years old now, and need to be replaced largely to, again, support safety as well as functionality in terms of the codes. And those codes can either be Consumer Product Safety Commission codes on playground equipment or American Disability Act codes with respect to playground equipment. And over and above that, with the ever-growing enrollment and expansion of our schools, there simply needs to be more playground equipment to support the now expanded enrollment at the school that may have not been the enrollment level there at that facility when it was built, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. $300,000 was the request. $150,000 is funded. There's no state support for that. Athletic stadiums, which is the monies that we use principally for the following categories of work. They're used to recarpet existing stadium synthetic turfs, existing synthetic turf field typically has a life expectancy that runs between 8 to 10 years, but then they have to be replaced to maintain their safety and playability. So this category of work supports that. Similarly, running tracks have about a 6-year lifespan. We've got 12 existing ones. Crofton will make our 13th one. They have about a 6-year useful life. So every year we have to strip off the latex rubber and do asphalt patching underneath and then replace the latex rubber surfacing and line marking systems on those. Again, 2 a year to keep pace with that 6-year rejuvenation cycle. A third category of work for athletic stadiums is the maintenance, replacement, or upgrade of our bleacher systems, largely, again, to maintain safety and usability of the bleachers, make sure bleacher systems meet both the structural, the fire life safety, and the ADA codes, and then to make sure that they are of the correct capacity to support both the home and visitor attendance levels of those schools. That account can also be used for the installation of new synthetic turf field. So we entered into, really it goes back to 2005 was the onset, 2007 really when we got going into a program in partnership with the state to at first provide one and only one synthetic turf field at each of the 12 then existing high schools. We accomplished that, and those were installed within the stadiums. And the agreement was always then, once we got that initial onslaught taken care of, we would double back and install a second synthetic turf field at all of our schools. We've been making a lot of headway in that regard. We've also been fortunate enough over the years to have received state grants. And for the first time, I believe, the management board that oversees the lottery and video gaming proceeds, I believe, is also looking to provide some support for this category of work. So it's an amalgam of funding, but again, it has to be sufficient funding to support our existing installed base. We can never really lose sight of that, because you've got to maintain your existing turf fields, your existing tracks, and your existing bleachers. And in addition, overlay on top of that, the installation of additional second turf fields, for example, where they did not previously exist. So $2.5 million is the recommended funding level for that. We are looking to work with the budget office and county government to get some further clarity and insights. It is being funded at $4 million. We simply need to roll up our sleeves and determine how much of that is associated with that's cyclical replacement or upgrade of existing infrastructure versus newly installed systems, and also take a look at the funding streams for those to make sure that we are fully and accurately take into account any state bond or grants that we may have received, any revenue we may have received from video lottery or gaming proceeds, and any revenue that we may receive from the county government, both in terms of either PAYGO funding or GO, general obligation bonds. So there's more work to be done in that line item. The last two line items, driveways and parking lot improvements, we asked for $1 million, $500,000 was supported, no state funding. And that is largely to do safety improvements in existing parking lots, to disaggregate the bus loops away from the regular vehicular drive aisles, so to disaggregate the bus loops away from regular cars, and that could be cars for either teachers, parking, kiss and rides for students, or visitors to the school. It also does support some modest parking space capacity improvements as well, but that's not the primary goal. The primary goal of that to date has largely been by a safety-driven initiative. And then the final line item is that grant that we've been notified, and again, share documentation with the county at both the county administration and auditor's department in terms of the funding that we have in fact been awarded from the Department of Defense Office of Economic Adjustments to support the renovation and expansion of the Meade High School facility. So that basically concludes the first and second pages. I'll very briefly just touch on the third and fourth pages, but we are not going to go into detail, and that will allow for sufficient question and answers. The page 3 are those recursive line items. Again, those line items that we have to attend to each and every year. And the color coding is the black font is what the Board of Education requested. Where you see a green font, the Board of Education and the County Administration program is an exact match. Where you'll see a blue font, that means that the County Administration is proposing funding those line items. They are not, however, funded at the level that was requested by the Board of Education. Therefore, there's a mismatch. Sometimes good, sometimes possibly bad, but those are depicted in the blue font. And where you'll see red font, that is where the county administration is not recommending any funding within those programmatic areas. So again, page 3 are those recurring projects, those ones that we attend to each and every year. And page 4 are those significant projects, which is typically the entire construction, reconstruction, or ground up construction of a named school. Again, that same color scheme, right? So green means an exact match, blue means there's a mismatch, but yet there is still funding, and red means there is no funding at all currently designated for that line item in that funding year. And with that, Madam President, we'll cede the formal portion of that presentation and turn it back to you and your colleagues for any questions that you might have with respect to the capital budget.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we're going to have a handful of questions. I see Mr. Pruski has raised his flag.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Councilman Andrew Pruski. Thank you, Alex, for that presentation. I have a question. I know that we worked hard to buy the West County Elementary property, and I know we've talked in the past about Solly and Mountain Road area elementary schools and trying to make sure that schools aren't overcrowded. And so I wanted you to address overall, you know, the impact if we delay West County Elementary, and also if you could just say the status of the Solly area. I know you and I have talked about many different sites. I've always been a proponent of buying land, and of course, you know, sometimes we have to delay to move it, but just the impact if we don't fund these things or kind of where we're at, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure, I'll take them in the order you presented with respect to West County Elementary School. The county does have the land now in its portfolio that would facilitate the construction. This is an area that for over 2 years now we knew was a hot zone. It was a zone that we did not previously anticipate needing a school, at least not a near-term school solution. But there were several large developments in that area of the county. And again, this is the area that I would categorize by West Crofton or south of Gambrills, heading down towards the Prince George's County line, but west of the 301 corridor. That area is, again, seeing some very large residential developments. The developments there actually have the fastest settlement pace they did last year, and they are on track again this year. If you watch the real estate numbers that Mr. Beecham spoke to earlier. So it's a rapidly growing part of the county. It's experiencing the fastest settlements in terms of single family homes. And I think it's the second fastest settlement rate in terms of townhomes right now in the county. Not being able to pursue the construction of that school will create a rather large burden on both the Crofton school community, as well as the communities comprised of Piney Orchard and potentially at some point in time, Watts Chapel and Four Seasons. The Board of Education undertook a redistricting effort 2 years ago to realign students to maximize the use of available resources within the Crofton and Gambrills and southern Piney Orchard, Four Seasons, Watts Chapel area. And part of that program, really that redistricting effort did contemplate the need for a new school. There was no mathematical solution set that would have solved for the problem, albeit with a new elementary school that this West County Elementary School is seeking to solve, and in addition onto Arundel Middle School. We spoke to the Arundel Middle School issue earlier. So in our estimation, it is pretty critical that we move forward with some sort of capacity solution at the elementary school level for that West County area. Turning to your second question, we still continue to work with the county government to canvass that Solly and Marley Neck Boulevard area to look for property acquisition opportunities. The county Public Works and Central Services offices have been very diligent. They've pursued a number of properties. We just haven't come to a solution set at this point in time that would lend itself to bringing a property acquisition solution forward to the council. But again, the county's administration is very active in this regard, and we would hope to be able to find an acquisition solution to that in the near future. It's one that we have to solve, Mr. Peruski. That Marley Neck Boulevard does have the highest, and has had now for quite some time, the highest settlement rate pace in terms of multifamily housing. We have added on to Solly Elementary School twice. We cannot do so again. We are completely out of options there. We have added on to Marley Elementary School now twice. There is zero opportunity to expand that school yet a third time. And we don't own any property up there. So that is a property acquisition matter that we do have to resolve at some point in time. Hopefully that's addressed the two questions you proposed, sir.
Thank you, Councilman Andrew Peruski. Thank you again, Alex. And I will follow up with you through this process. I'm hoping that we can make some changes to see if we could fix that. Thank you.
I see a question from Councilman Volke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So turning to the second part of Councilman Peruski's question about the Solly Corridor Northeast Mountain Road Elementary School. So you and I had some exchange at the end of March to talk about this. And what I had understood is that the county does actually own suitable property in the Farmington Village area, and it would be acceptable to build a school there. Why is that not being pursued? I understand the desire to get something further up the Marley Neck corridor. I get that, but this is kind of at the end of that as well. I mean, it's down off Catherine Avenue, but it still serves a similar community. So I guess I'm curious why that's not a candidate for a site for a school.
If I can chime in, excuse me, Mr. Sheknovic, I need to, I've been remiss. I need to remind my colleagues or let my colleagues know that Mr. Trumbauer is also in a waiting room ready to answer a question that relates more to the administration and a policy decision. But Alex, you can certainly.
Yes, so Alex Sheknovic with the Board of Education. And yes, Mr. Volke, we do, the Board of Education actually does own a piece of property just off Mountain Road and Catherine Avenue, the property that you're referencing. And we have for a number of years there. It's pretty far south and west of where our capacity crunches right now. The county had a pretty robust general development plan that had a lot of growth lined up for the Mountain Road corridor, the Fort Smallwood and Mountain Road corridor. That growth has not progressed at the pace that the general development plan or the county government has contemplated at this point in time. Conversely, the land that you and I and Mr. Pruski were speaking to up along the Marley Neck Corridor Boulevard, that was all warehouse and industrial and commercial zone space that was owned by CXX. The county, there was never really the contemplation that large-scale residential development was actually even going to occur back there if you took a look at those zoning maps. But through a number of policy decisions that were made over the course of the year, those W and C and I zoned land were flipped to residential, and not just residential, but R20, R50, et cetera. And now we have a couple thousand homes in an area that we thought we would probably have less than a couple dozen at most. Those homes are built, those homes are occupied, those homes continue to get put up at an extremely rapid pace. The APF ordinance has not served to really slow down the pace of stick building and settlements up there. And just like the conversation in the Two Rivers area, where we thought all that land was going to be age restricted and not really built upon, all that commercial, industrial, and warehouse space up in the Marley Neck Boulevard that we never thought was going to be developed into thousands of residential homes. Now we find ourselves with those thousands of residential homes there. So we think we want to have the school geographically proximal to the students. We would like to have a school up in that Tanyard Cove, Tanyard Spring area that the youngsters could actually walk to, or maybe have a very short bus ride to, rather than have to do a very large wholesale redistricting that would pull, you know, kids from Stolly down to Marley down to Freetown over to High Point down to, et cetera. So that's one, there's a very disruptive factor. But the second piece, Councilman Volke, is that the county's general development plan still does have a fair amount of space that can be built and occupied by residential type occupancies along the Mountain Road corridor between Freetown and heading out past Jacobsville. And if we built upon that space today and we absorb that through a large redistricting to provide some temporary relief for the Marley Neck Boulevard, when that growth and development does occur on that Mountain Road corridor segment, we'll find ourselves without property there. If you go back to the initial purpose of that property, the property really was built to serve the development that's contemplated on that Mountain Road corridor. And the residents of that area have long sought to have that school built to serve them. And so while we certainly can, it would be a short-term fix, possibly, albeit through a large-scale disruption to the Marley Neck corridor issue, but it would eliminate the solution that we would have on Mountain Road. And it's because of that we think the better alternative will be to preserve that piece of property there at Mountain and Catherine for the development there in your district, Mr. Volke, along that part of your district, and we simply go to property acquisition route for an additional school up in the Morley Neck corridor.
If I may have a brief follow-up, Madam Chair. Thank you. I just want to be clear that the general development plan that is being referenced was adopted long before any of us were on the council. And frankly, the zoning changes that are being referenced up there on Marley Neck Boulevard and Solly Road were done, as I understand it, in the early 2000s in that iteration of the general development plan, not anytime recently. So I just want to be clear for anyone listening or any of my constituents. Again, this is Nathan Volke from District 3. And the other sort of piece that I would follow up on that with you is this. In terms of education impact funds, I see in the capital budget that my district, I guess, I remember there's something weird about the districts and where they correspond. So it says District 3. I'm not sure that's actually my district, but I would like it to be because it looks like there's a big chunk of money there. And I'm just curious, where can some of those impact fees be spent to try to fix this? Which districts correspond with which? I think that's page, oh goodness. It shows it as page 4 of the proposed capital budget for Board of Ed. I don't know if you see that. That's not in the materials that you provided us. That's in the actual capital budget materials. You're on mute still.
Mr. Sheknovich, you are muted.
Alex, you're on mute.
So the impact fee districts kind of, nobody actually almost knows how they came to be. They do not align with legislative district, either councilmatic or state legislative district. They don't align, there's 7 school districts, there's only 5 DPW districts, so they don't align with anything. We have had ongoing discussions with both with really multiple administrations, the Leopold administration, the Hsu administration, the Newman interim administration, and now with Mr. Pittman. As you know, he's got a work group to take a look at school impact fees and the adequate public facility ordinance, et cetera. So why there's 7, we don't know, but 7 we have today. There is a legal requirement, there needs to be a nexus between the harm and a remedy. So monies collected from development because of capacity related concerns by way of impacts can only be spent on capacity solutions. So they cannot be spent on maintenance activities. They can't even be spent on the renovation or replacement of existing schools, only to the extent that possibly capacity might be added. So if you have an existing 600-person school and you replace it with a 700-person school, impact fees can be used to support the 100 additional seats, but not the cost correlated with the existing 600 school. The reason we've been talking about this, Mr. Volke, is you're right. I call it, and maybe this isn't an elegant term, but I call it strangulated money. So we've got money sitting in some districts, but we don't have a project in that district. And by that, I'm talking about the impact fee zone district. Very close across this arbitrary line, we've got a project, but we don't have any impact fee money. We obviously, I think we would all agree we want to put this money to work. It was, garnered for a specific use. I'm certain that the school system, the budget office, the legislative branch, we all want to put this money to work. And we want to do it aggressively to create these capacity solutions. But we're going to have to redraw, some of these lines. So we have looked at options in the past. I know that Mr. Trumbauer and the administration is keenly aware of this, and we have already had discussions before they were somewhat slowed through this current COVID situation about bringing forward a legislative solution that may somewhat put this county in a better position to utilize those dollars that have been aggregated for capacity-related solutions to work. But again, TBD, it's part of the work in progress.
I actually have it's not so much a question as it is a comment, but with relationship to school construction coming in District 2 for the new Old Mill as well as Quarterfield, those are two areas that are also in need of sidewalk connectivity. I've started a conversation with the administration about where the school system responsibility ends with sidewalks and where the county can pick up to ensure putting in sidewalks so that we're coordinating. Like for Quarterfield, when Quarterfield gets a new school, we have neighborhoods down Quarterfield Road that could potentially be walkers if it were safe. They're riding a bus now, but pulling together better coordination between DPW and the school system regarding that connectivity, and so that the projects, while Quarterfield's being built or breaks ground this year, we're considering that sidewalk work on the county side. So I would love to see if we can't bring everybody around the same table to make some of that coordination happen. Same with the new high school, where there'll be lots of neighborhoods that would potentially be walkers as long as there's a safe way to walk. So that's more a comment, but if you have anything to add to that.
I do. Again, Alex Shaknovich, Chief Operating Officer. This is actually something that I'm extremely excited about, Madam President, in that, you know, the current administration has made this one of their priorities. Raymond Robinson, Chris Phipps in Public Works and Transportation have fully embraced the idea of a walk shed, right? Our limit of disturbance typically ends at the end of our property line. We certainly want to maximize the opportunities for individuals to either walk or bike to our schools for instruction, or to our schools for recreation, or past our schools possibly to go to work or wherever. So the current administration has a very robust system in place. Chief Administrative Officer Burge has absolutely taken the bull of the horns of this bull in his personal charge, and has directed that the school district and Public Works and Transportation work very collaboratively to not only design the school itself, but to take a look at that entire transportation grid to make sure that we maximize both walk and bike ridership opportunities to all of our existing schools, but in particular the ones that we have the opportunity to build anew, like a West County Elementary School or high school, et cetera.
Thank you. I look forward to questioning those departments as well about that topic later in the next 2 weeks. Do we have any other questions regarding the capital budget from my colleagues? Oh, Mr. Volke, yes, you found a question.
Hey, always. So looking at the all-day pre-K stuff, I know that you said that you had 4 schools that you're trying to finish this very long-term project. And I know that your intention was to get all of them, I think probably as soon as possible, but it's now looking like maybe 2 this year, 2 next year. What would it look like in terms of your capacity if that were to be spread out over more time in terms of the capital budget? And before you answer that, I just want to make a statement for anybody listening, because I got a lot of flack for this at the last hearing when I started asking questions. When I'm asking things, it doesn't mean I'm cutting it. It just means I'm trying to find out the answer. So I want people to know that, whoever's listening, because there were a number of people who reached out to me afterward and said, why are you cutting all these things? I said, we're asking questions. That's what I think we're elected to do, and that's our job. So with that, thank you.
For the record, Alex Shekno, Chief Operating Officer. So in most of these schools, basically, we're using portable classrooms to take on that additional surge. We do not typically put our youngest learners in portable classrooms, so you would not find typically pre-kindergartners or kindergartners or even first graders in portable classrooms. So at these schools, what you'll more often see than not is the 4th or 5th graders may be displaced to portables, allowing the kindergarten students to use space inside of the 4 walls. So the direct answer to your question is the longer that these targeted kindergarten additions are not put on, then simply the school will have to exist in their condition whereby some of the students will be in portables. The norm is once we get the spaces constructed, we would hope to bring everybody inside of the building and eliminate the portable classrooms at those facilities.
Thank you.
Ms. Lacey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Sarah Lacey, District 1. Mr. Sheknovich, my kids love to play this game called Would You Rather, and I'm guessing you probably know about this game. And I just can't help myself. I have to ask you, if you had $175,000 more, would you rather put that in the Thames project and see that thing just finally gone off the list? Or would you rather put it somewhere else?
Alex Shakno, Chief Operating Officer. You know, one of the nice pleasures here is sort of working your way out of a job. So we used to have open space classrooms, but now we've completed those. Open space classrooms were a vestige of the 60s, and it only took us a couple decades to get rid of those. The technology in Maryland wiring initiative began in 2001. The full-day kindergarten program began in 2005, and here we are trying to bring closure to those. So with respect to that, I would obviously like to see those projects brought to closure and put in the rearview mirror so we didn't have to look at those. All of that being said, I would not do a project like that over something that was health and safety related or had to do with providing adequate, really building occupancy, you know, something that's going to jeopardize the heating or cooling system of a building, jeopardize the water integrity of the building by not having an intact, highly functioning roof, be out of compliance with the American with Disability Act. As much as I would love to do that wiring project for $175,000, prudence would probably, unfortunately, say I would more likely than not be in a position to have to apply that somewhere else. And I don't want to minimize the wiring job because that really is a safety issue too. Because here's what happens when those wiring jobs aren't done. What you wind up having is temporary cords and surge protectors, you know, across the floor of the buildings, which creates tripping hazards or potential, you know, electrical overload conditions. So I'm in no way, shape, or form trying to minimize that, because that is a critical and vital thing too. And I absolutely, if you were to ask the fire marshal, probably one of his top concerns are temporary electrical cords used to support, you know, so the fire marshal's office would probably like that one taken care of almost as much as any other line item as well. They're equally important, you know. We gotta get these done, Miss Lacey.
Well, I do support that. Thank you.
All right, I'm not seeing any more questions, but I know my folks at Rippling Woods and Old Mill Middle and High School would love to say that they don't have open space classrooms anymore, Mr. Sheknovic, but they still do. They are being taken care of with this capital budget. So we do still have open space here in District 2. So Kristen Etzel would not let me recess this meeting without commenting on that. So we are very excited about this capital budget as it does get rid of open space in the next 3 or 4 years. I don't see any more questions from my colleagues. I want to thank the Board of Education for their excellent department reports, as well as answering the questions thoroughly from my colleagues. And we look forward to the ongoing conversation as we move through the next 45 days of this budget. With that, get out my script. Is there any other business to be brought before the County Council at this time? Seeing none, we are going to recess until 7 p.m. This evening for our previously scheduled virtual legislative session. May I have a motion to recess until 7 p.m. this evening?
So moved. Lacey.
May I have a second?
Second, Councilman Persky.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We are in recess. Please visit our website for more details on this meeting. For all of our listeners, you will need to go to our website to get the ID and password for our 7 p.m. meeting tonight. And thank you. Have a great afternoon.